Does no contact work on avoidance? What they secretly expect. We've all been there, left confused, second-guessing every text we sent, every moment we shared, after someone with an avoidant attachment style suddenly pulls away. And then comes the big question. Should I go no contact? Will that make them miss me? Will they come back? Let me tell you this, no contact isn't just a strategy. It's a mirror. For people with avoidant tendencies, those who fear too much closeness, who crave connection but run from vulnerability, no contact can have a powerful effect. But here's the twist. It only works if you use it for the right reason. They don't want to feel pursued, chased, or emotionally obligated. What they secretly expect is that you'll keep trying. They expect the late night texts, the emotional pleas, the effort to fix what they broke. Why? Because deep down, that confirms their fear. If I get close, I'll lose my freedom. I'll get swallowed by someone else's needs. So when you don't chase, when you reclaim your space, something different happens. You become the opposite of what they expect. You become safe, self-respecting, and unpredictable. But here's the most important truth. No contact is not about getting them back. It's about getting you back. You shift from being a reaction to their behavior to becoming the creator of your own peace. When you do that, you stop waiting for breadcrumbs. You start seeing the entire table you've been starving at, and you walk away to build your own feast. And if they come back, they return not because you begged, but because you became someone who doesn't need them to feel whole. When people hear about the no contact rule, they often think of it as a clever tactic to win someone back, especially when dealing, if I get close, I'll lose my freedom, I'll get swallowed by someone else's needs. So when you don't chase, when you reclaim your space, something different happens. You become the opposite of what they expect. You become safe, self-respecting, and unpredictable. But here's the most important truth. No contact is not about getting them back. It's about getting you back. You shift from being a reaction to their behavior to becoming the creator of your own peace. When you do that, you stop waiting for breadcrumbs. You start seeing the entire table you've been starving at, and you walk away to build your own feast. And if they come back, they return not because you begged, but because you became someone who doesn't need them to feel whole. When people hear about the no contact rule, they often think of it as a clever tactic to win someone back, especially when dealing not just for them to think, but for you to feel, and more importantly, to remember who you were before you began over-persummoning in a dynamic that kept taking from you emotionally. Avoidants often pull away not because they don't care, but because closeness feels threatening to their autonomy. When you stop chasing, you stop feeding that narrative. You're no longer reinforcing their idea that intimacy equals pressure. Your choice to go no contact sends a different signal. It says, I am not going to perform for your approval. It says, I'm willing to be missed. That's powerful. And whether or not they come back, you come back to your own power, your dignity, your internal balance. No contact is you drawing a line, not as an ultimatum, but as a form of self-respect. It's you saying, I won't fight to prove my worth to someone who's unsure. They even want to receive it. And in that mirror, you might see things clearly for the first time. You might realize how often you've been giving love at the expense of yourself. You might realize how much of your energy has gone into decoding someone else's emotional resistance. That's what makes no contact transformational. Not for how it affects them, but for how it reveals you to yourself. Avoidants often operate with an internal belief that closeness equals danger. It's not always obvious on the surface. They might start off deeply engaged, even romantic, but the moment emotional intimacy deepens, they begin to retreat. This is not because they don't feel, but because feeling too much activates a fear of losing themselves. When this happens, many people panic and chase. They text, call, explain, apologize, try to understand, try to fix. It's a natural impulse when something slips through your fingers to reach out and grab it. But this is exactly what the avoidant expects. They expect pursuit because it confirms what they already fear, that being in a relationship will mean giving up their independence, their emotional space, their control. Your reaching out, as well-intentioned as it is, validates their unconscious belief that intimacy is invasive, that someone will eventually ask too much of them, get too close, and demand too much presence. So they pull away even further, and you end up feeding a cycle where your pursuit becomes the very reason they keep running. What breaks this cycle isn't more effort, it's the absence of it. When you stop chasing, you interrupt the pattern they've come to anticipate. You become an outlier in their experience. And that shift doesn't go unnoticed. It's in the silence that they begin to question their assumptions. They expect you to beg. When you don't, they start to wonder why. They expect you to fight for closeness. When you don't, it challenges their belief that every connection must eventually become suffocating. Avoidants rarely reflect when the emotional noise is loud. But when things go quiet, when their expectations aren't met with desperation, that's when reflection begins. Suddenly, your absence doesn't look like punishment, it looks like strength. And strength is magnetic, even to someone afraid of connection. The irony is that what they push against the hardest, emotional pressure, is the very thing they expect in your response. When it doesn't come, they have no emotional script for how to respond. And that's where curiosity grows. What makes someone stop reaching out? What does it mean when you don't try to fix it? That emotional silence becomes louder than any message you could send. You step out of the role they mentally placed you in, and by doing so, you force them to see you differently. Not as someone who's chasing, but someone who knows their value well enough to stop. Silence can be uncomfortable, even scary, especially when your emotions are deeply involved. When someone pulls away, it feels like a void that demands to be filled with a message, a call, some kind of action. But the truth is, silence has a language of its own. And when used from a place of strength rather than fear, it speaks louder than any words ever could. This is especially true when dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. An avoidant person often retreats from emotional intensity. They become overwhelmed, not necessarily by love, but by the vulnerability that comes with it. When you go silent, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, you disrupt the emotional rhythm they've come to expect. You create space, and in that space, they're left with only one thing, themselves. No distractions, no comforting confirmation that you're still available in the background. That silence starts to echo. You might think they're unaffected by your withdrawal, that because they aren't reaching out, they don't notice. But that's rarely true. What they notice is the absence of a pattern. They notice when the dynamic shifts. When they no longer receive your energy, your validation, your emotional availability, it becomes unsafe. Not because they suddenly become ready for intimacy, but because they aren't used to that level of stillness. Avoidants thrive in control. Your silence removes that control. In this quiet, something powerful happens. They begin to question not just what happened, but why it happened. Why the person they expected to keep showing up suddenly stopped. Why you're no longer trying to mend the connection. Your silence holds a kind of dignity. It says, I'm not. They're going to beg for the attention you're unsure about giving. That message, though unspoken, is clear. What you're doing, in essence, is holding emotional boundaries without having to justify them. You're letting your actions or your lack of reaction set the standard. And that kind of stillness requires strength. Anyone can send a text out of impulse. It takes real emotional maturity to say nothing and trust that your silence communicates your self-worth more effectively than any carefully crafted message ever could. In their world, where closeness often triggers withdrawal, your decision not to chase becomes a statement, a declaration that you will not bend to someone else's fear of intimacy. And in that space, your silence becomes a powerful mirror, one they cannot ignore. When someone pulls away, especially someone with an avoidant attachment style, your first instinct might be to hold on tighter. You want clarity, connection, maybe even closure. But the more you reach, the more they retreat. That's where no contact becomes not just a choice, but a lifeline back to yourself. It's easy to forget how much emotional energy you've spent trying to manage their discomfort, trying to bridge the emotional distance they created. No contact flips the focus. It redirects all that energy inward, where it always should have been. Reclaiming yourself isn't just about ignoring their silence. It's about tuning back into your own voice, the one that got quieter each time you made excuses for their behavior. The one that started to question whether your needs were too much, your love too intense, your standards too high. No contact gives you the breathing room to reconnect with that inner voice, the one that remembers who you were before you started shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. In that space, things become clear. You start noticing how much you compromise, not because compromise is bad, but because you did it alone. You start realizing how often you over-explained, over-apologized, over-assumptioned in hopes of maintaining a connection that was always halfway out the door. The silence no longer feels empty. It starts to feel sacred. It's where you begin rebuilding trust in yourself, not in their potential. This is when you stop waiting for their validation to feel okay. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly they come back or how guilty they seem. Instead, you focus on your healing, your growth, your boundaries. You begin investing in yourself emotionally the same way you once invested in them. And that's where your power lives, not in whether they notice your absence, but in how fully you show up for yourself in that absence. No contact, used correctly, isn't a pause button while you wait for them to return. It's a reset, a chance to rediscover who you are without constantly accommodating someone who couldn't meet you halfway. You remember your value not because someone else confirms it, but because you finally gave yourself the space to feel it again. You stop asking, will they come back? And start asking, do I even want them to? That's the moment you realize no contact worked, not because of what it did to them, but because of what it awakened in you. When someone with an avoidant attachment style comes back, it's often because something shifted, not necessarily in them, but in you. The version of you they once knew, the one who may have tiptoed around their walls, overextended emotionally, or constantly reached out for connection, is no longer standing at the same place. You've evolved. You've grown in your absence. And if they return, they're not returning to the same emotional dynamic they left behind. Avoidants are often drawn back to the people they felt emotionally safe with, those who offered warmth, patience, and presence. But if they're coming back expecting the same version of you, they're in for something different, because no contact has a way of changing people. When you've taken the time to reclaim your emotional ground, your boundaries, and your sense of peace, you no longer entertain the idea of love that feels one-sided or conditional. So when they reappear, it's not about welcoming them with open arms out of longing or desperation. It's about observing, listening, paying attention to whether they're stepping back in with a genuine willingness to engage, to grow, and to meet you at your level. It's about asking yourself, not just if they've changed, but if you still want what they offer, if what they bring now aligns with the person you've become in their absence. You're not the same person who is afraid of losing them. You're the person who found strength in letting go. And from that position, you're not driven by fear of abandonment. You're guided by clarity. So if they come back, it's on your terms, not from a place of ego or power games, but from self-respect. You're no longer trying to fit into the space they left behind. You're inviting them to meet you in the space you've created. Avoidants may test the waters to see if the old dynamic still exists, but you're not here to repeat old cycles. You're here to build something new or nothing at all. Their return isn't the victory, your transformation is. The connection only has a future if it honors the emotional growth that's taken place. Otherwise, their reappearance is just noise, and your silence continues to be the clearest statement you can make. This isn't about revenge or playing hard to get. It's about protecting the peace you fought for during no contact. You're no longer trying to earn love. You're standing in the kind of self-worth that no longer negotiates for crumbs. If they come back, they'll have to meet you where you are now, not where you used to be. So does no contact work on avoidance? Yes, but not in the way most people think. It's not a trick to lure someone back. It's not a test they have to pass. It's a moment where you stop abandoning yourself to win the attention of someone who's unsure if they're ready to show up. It's your declaration that love, to be meaningful, has to feel mutual. It has to feel safe, and it has to feel chosen. The truth is, what they secretly expect is your pursuit. They expect the validation that confirms their fears about closeness. But when you step back, not in anger, but in peace, you become the exception. You become the person who loves without begging, who values connection, but refuses to chase it at the cost of your self-worth. And in that silence, whether they return or not, you reclaim something far more valuable than their attention. You reclaim you. Thank you for giving your heart the space to hear this. And thank you for having the courage to prioritize yourself, even when it's hard. Remember, real connection never demands that you lose yourself. The right person won't need you to shrink because they'll be brave enough to meet you fully. Take care of your heart. You're worth showing up for, first by you and then by anyone who wants to be part of your life. Thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.